Up this Friday lunchtime.
A new type of aerial bombardment. The thousands of leaflets dropped on Gaza warning more than 1 million civilians they must move south for their own safety.
Here, fears for the backlash as 3 Jewish schools in North London shut with growing fears of violence. One head teacher warns parents to keep their children indoors.
And as the Prime Minister meets other European leaders in Sweden, he warns that terrorism must not be allowed to prevail.
In Israel, the build-up is continuing as more armoured vehicles mass on the border with Gaza, while the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, launches a last attempt at diplomacy in Qatar, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. We'll bring you the very latest live. First, your headlines with Tamsin.
Pip, thank you and good afternoon from the GB newsroom at 12:01. Israel has dropped leaflets in Gaza warning residents to move for their own safety and to distance themselves from Hamas terrorists who they say are using civilians as human shields. 1.1 million residents have been told to move to the south within the next 24 hours for their own safety. The United Nations says such a move is impossible without devastating humanitarian consequences. The First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, has posted a video on social media today from his mother-in-law, a retired nurse who's in Gaza.
Everybody from Gaza is moving towards where we are. 1 million people, no food, no water. And still they're bombing them as they leave. Where are we going to put them? But my thought is, all these people in the hospital cannot be evacuated. Where's humanity? Where's people's hearts in the world to let this happen in this day and age? And may God help us.
Meanwhile, the Israel Defence Forces continue to amass tanks and soldiers near the Gaza Strip border, with a ground invasion looking increasingly likely. Tension is also building in Israel's northern border with Lebanon, with IDF troops bracing for the militant group Hezbollah to open up a second front in the war. The US Secretary of State met the Palestinian president this morning in Jordan. Antony Blinken is touring Middle Eastern countries, trying to stop the Israel-Hamas war spilling over into neighbouring countries. The meeting comes after Mahmoud Abbas condemned violence against civilians last night, after having previously failed to do so. Palestinian state media reports that he told the Secretary of State he rejects the forced displacement of Palestinians in Gaza. Some North London Jewish schools are closing today over concerns for the children's safety amid the Israel-Hamas war. It's reported that 3 Jewish schools in North London told parents they would not reopen until Monday. Meanwhile, Number 10 has announced an additional £3 million of funding to go towards providing extra security for the UK's Jewish population. It comes as the Jewish security charity CST recorded a 400% increase in anti-Semitic incidents since the outbreak of conflict in Israel. To other news now, Nigel Farage has been rebanked for personal and business accounts. Lloyds has accepted the GB News presenter after 10 other banks rejected him. Mr Farage was involved in a public row with NatWest in July after the group closed his bank accounts due to his political views. He says he's pleased to see one high street lender isn't politically prejudiced. A teacher has been killed and 2 others injured in a knife attack in France. The attack happened at a high school in the city of Arras in the north of the country. Local media reported the attacker shouting Allahu Akbar, and it's understood the suspect was on a security watch list in connection with radical Islam, though that's not been independently verified. France's anti-terrorism office say they are now investigating. The EU is investigating the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, after disinformation was spread in the wake of the Hamas terror attacks. In a letter sent to the platform's owner, Elon Musk, the European Commission said there were indications that X is being used to disseminate illegal content, despite being flagged by authorities. Elon Musk says the Commission should list its examples publicly, even after various media reports of questionable content. The investigation is the first under the EU's new tech rules on harmful content. The Prime Minister is in Sweden today, meeting with Northern European allies. Leaders were expected to focus on the threat from Russia, but the gathering has been overshadowed by the conflict between Israel and Gaza. Rishi Sunak reminded the summit they are the first line of defence across much of the region. Ukrainian President Zelensky also addressed the joint expeditionary conference. In a post on social media, he called for a full-scale defence from free nations against Russia, Hamas or other terrorists. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Mark and Pip.
Tamsin, thank you and welcome back to the live desk. With Israel now warning at least 1.1 million Gazans to leave the north of the Strip within 24 hours. These leaflets dropped into Gaza City to tell civilians to evacuate immediately. Well, they've been told that for their own safety, on those leaflets, they should head south to the Wadi Gaza and achieve some kind of safety in the south. Israel, meanwhile, massing troops and armour on the border ahead of any anticipated ground offensive. But you can see from these latest pictures we're getting that people are taking the warning seriously.
But Hamas has told residents to ignore the warning and not leave their homes. Charities on the ground say that Israel's evacuation request is impossible, while the UN says mass relocation cannot be done without devastating consequences.
Let's get the very latest now with our reporter Charlie Peters, who can update us in Tel Aviv. And Charlie, while the focus is on the civilian population and the humanitarian consequences, yet more reports of rockets being fired from Gaza towards Ashkelon in the south of Israel this morning.
That's right. In the last hour, we had 150 rockets reported sending up from Gaza to Ashkelon. Ashkelon has been the scene of many rocket barrages since Saturday. On Saturday, Hamas fired 4,500 rockets into Israeli territory after it launched those attacks out of the Gaza border east into southern Israel. The number has dropped now, the IDF claim, to 200 to 400 a day as they seek to sustain a long-term bombing campaign and turn this war into something that doesn't last a week but stretches into the months, the IDF may fear. And so, as the barrages come out from Gaza, we do see the IDF now seeking, with their air forces, to strike back and hit more Hamas military capabilities. And also, at the same time, that convoy gathering at the east of Gaza and all around the border in order to prepare for that likely ground incursion before they can move in and heavy armour and infantry can go into one of the most densely populated parts of the world. More shaping and more softening by artillery and airstrikes needs to happen. And so this warning has gone in, a warning that has been called impossible by charities on the ground, partly because there are just two main supply routes out of North Gaza into the south. Both of those routes are likely to have been damaged somewhat by the heavy bombardments that we have seen by the Israeli air forces in the last 6 days. They hit over 750 targets last night. And at the same time, of course, people are taking shelter in the north of Gaza. At least 1.1 million people, many of them in hospitals, many of them in schools, the safest place to be during this period of heavy conflict. Can they get to the south? We will see. But already reports have shown that many people are taking it upon themselves, regardless of what Hamas, the UN or the IDF are saying, and they are trying to extract from the north of the Gaza Strip.
Charlie, we know that the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is now embarking on that, what you might say, final round of diplomatic talks, if you like. He has met today, he's on his way to Qatar now, but he has met with the Palestinian president, who has told him, the Palestinian president, that they reject the forced displacement of Palestinians in Gaza.
Yes, but of course the Israeli military at the same time is trying to expel and reject the force of what it describes as Hamas military capabilities. It seems more and more likely that any diplomatic efforts, including international support from the US, are unlikely to succeed in this situation. I think we can see this morning's demand for over 1 million people to flee from the north of Gaza as a very clear understanding of where this war is going next. It will mean more severe and heavy bombardment into the Gaza Strip, and it would also allow, I think, the IDF to use more complex and more severe munitions. We do know that advanced munitions were delivered to the Israelis by the US on Tuesday night, and we also know that in the past the IDF has deployed so-called bunker buster rounds into the Gaza Strip in order to decimate those tunnels and shelters and bunkers that Hamas militants use underground the Gaza Strip to both prepare their rockets, hide their fighters, and potentially also keep hostages.
Yeah, now you've got a very busy scene behind you there, Charlie. Just to explain for us what's happening with, obviously at the moment, the Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, saying now is a time for war, and clearly the whole country's mobilising in one way or another.
That's right, the army here, they've activated over 360,000 reservists. 500,000 soldiers need to be kitted out to defend the country on all fronts. And they also need to prepare that invading force for that likely ground incursion into the Gaza Strip. But the whole nation is on a war footing here. Yesterday, we were at a convention centre where supplies were being gathered to send to civilians and soldiers alike. Where I am today, this is a restaurant. Last week, it was taking hundreds of covers a night. Now it's been transformed into a kitchen to feed an army. They're sending out 30,000 meals a day to feed soldiers here across Israel, especially those in the northern areas, which are predominantly reservists. The army is struggling to supply its troops. That's partly why this invasion is taking more time to start. They need to soften the ground with more artillery, but they also need to get the right equipment and logistical supplies to their troops. You can't just generate 500,000 forces overnight. It is going to take more time, but I do think that bombardment over, which is going to come, of course, more severely into the Gaza Strip after this warning, is a clear indicator that this invasion is now almost certainly coming in the next few days.
Charlie in Tel Aviv, thank you very much for updating us there on the ground. More, of course, from you throughout the afternoon.
Joining us now to discuss this, to analyse it, is the former head of counter-terrorism at the MOD, Major General Chip Chapman. Chip, let's just start with the warning that Israel has issued. Why do you think they issued this warning at this time? Is it because that massive ground offensive is imminent? Or could it also be because of the diplomacy that Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, has tried to bring to this situation?
Well, the first thing is we've still got precursor operations going on. That is that the Israelis seek to destroy the rocket launches and the logistic bases for those rocket launches. That's why I think you'll see those diminishing over the next few days. Indeed, they used that sort of in 2021, Operation Guardian to the Walls. They used geointelligence linked to machine learning and supercomputing to satellites to almost take out those targets in real time. So you've still got those operations going on and securing the home base, that is the area on their side of the border, before you get to the strike operations around Gaza City. Now, the reason they've issued the warning is because the Israelis do seek to try and work in an ethical context. That is, that their targeting should follow the rules of war, to be proportionate, necessary, and to have distinction, that you don't want to go after civilian targets. They won't go after hospitals, for example. They want to go after military targets. And unfortunately, of course, some of the military targets of Hamas are amongst the civilian infrastructure. So it makes sense from an Israeli perspective to do this. They also use other techniques like using social media, WhatsApp and texting to tell people to go away. But the Israeli concept for victory, which came out in a 2020 paper, does say that they have to be wary of legal and psychological snares. And Hamas saying that people should stay there is one of those legal and psychological snares that they face, because ultimately this is about colliding narratives, who seem to be good, who seem to be bad, and bad pictures of civilian bodies doesn't look good in anyone's.
Do you share Yeah, the analysis of Sir Alex Younger, former head of SIS, Secret Intelligence Service, that Hamas has laid a trap here and that Israel is maybe about to fall into it in terms of this ground offensive.
Not necessarily. So, rather like 9/11, you could say that the 1,500 people who were killed on Saturday, you could treat that as mass criminal murder. And you could say to Hamas, please hand over all those people who are responsible for that taking place. That patently isn't going to happen. And therefore, you go back to all those things that lead to the causes of war. We go back 2,500 years to Thucydides. You know, causes of war are fear, honor, or interest. The sad thing is all three of those are present, and that leads to a toxic mixture, which almost inevitably means that Israel will go and do something because they want to try and change the strategic calculus, as the defense minister has said, for the next 50 years. They need to absolutely destroy Hamas. And I use that in the terms of a mission verb from the military, that is to kill or so damage an enemy force so that is rendered useless. That's what they seek to do. It won't, however, kill the idea of Hamas. But we must realize, I think, that there is a difference between the desire for a Palestinian state from accommodationists such as the Fatah movement and Hamas, who are there to, they want Israel to be exterminated from the map. Yeah. There's an absolute difference between them.
But clearly there are those within the new Israeli war cabinet. The Times is reporting generals or former generals involved in operational planning. It's saying there are no easy options here, that you cannot, as you say, wipe out an ideology by going into these streets. The last time they tried it in 2014, I think they lost 166 troops, and Hamas was back in action pretty quickly because of this system of tunnels. On a military scale, is this the right thing to do? Is it achievable?
Well, you need to, again, look at what Israel looks at for the theory of victory in something like this. So the operation must be done at acceptable cost to the forces, acceptable cost to the home front, i.e. it can't endure for forever, and it must be done in a way that is irrefutable. And that comes back to this notion of it must be so enduring that it doesn't lead to a threat from that flank for the next 50 years, as they've defined it.
Chip, as ever, thank you for your analysis. And, of course, we'll wait to see the developments of the coming hours and days. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, to get more of an idea of the latest situation in Gaza, we can talk to Head of Development at the Global Relief Trust, Attica Rahman. Thank you very much for talking to us, Attica. We are being warned of potentially devastating humanitarian consequences here if Israel, as it appears to be doing, very shortly launches this massive ground invasion. What do you understand is the situation on the ground now, and how incredibly difficult is it for these civilians to find shelter?
The answer is impossible. How do you get 1.1 million people out of a war zone in 24 hours? That's, I think, 40,000 every minute or something along those lines. I don't know what the plan is here, but it's impossible. You've got children in incubators, you've got old ladies, people who are disabled, paralyzed, injured, you've got people on life support machine. The roads have been damaged, buildings have been smashed. How are they expecting civilian population to move away from their homes? And a lot of them will not move. There's people out there who we've spoken to who've said they will not move because the last time they moved, they never got their homes back. So they are worried that if they move from northern Gaza into southern Gaza, then this area will then be taken over as occupied territories. And this is the issue here. And what we're going to see is, the death toll is going to be far greater.
Yeah, we should add, obviously, that the leaflets that have been dropped, that the Israelis say you will be allowed back to your homes once this has been completed. But clearly, as you say, there will be raised eyebrows at that from many who've experienced the previous years of displacement. I think we can bring a map up to show Wadi Gaza, where basically this sort of division line, that they will be safe to the south of that. What would be the ability of you and other humanitarian relief organisations to actually house and feed and water and sanitate people in that southern area of Gaza?
You've got 1.1 million people in that northern Gaza. The population of Gaza is around 2.3 million on a 40 square mile radius. You know, if you put that into practice, that is one of the most populated areas in the world when it comes to people. You know, where will they go to? You know, where will they live? And you're asking the question, which is a really important question: can NGOs and charities, the UN and World Health organizations and whoever, can they provide for the people? The answer is simply no. The fact that there's a total blockade, that doesn't help the situation, and so the question is, where will they go? And it's easy saying people will be allowed to move back to their homes. What home will they come back to? You know, we're talking in one neighborhood. I was speaking to our team that there was 28 residential blocks destroyed and 512 homes. So what homes will people come back to when this conflict is over? And it's sadly, it's depressing. It's probably one of the most depressing things that I've been involved in my time in the charity sector, because you feel like there's no hope in what we're trying to do here.
And what's your latest plan in terms of trying to get supplies and aid in?
We are speaking with, obviously, there's been an 18-year blockade in Gaza. So a lot of the businesses, the suppliers, they're resilient. They understand that every year or 2 years, something happens. So a lot of stuff has been stockpiled. But of course, our assessment on the ground with our partners, with our people on the ground, they're saying that there's probably another 3 to 4 days worth of food. Yeah. Now, this will get much more decreased, because if people are moving from one area to the other, the chances are these goods will not be able to get moved. You know, we're talking about water. There's 5 huge desalination plants in Gaza. 3 of them are not available. So 2 of them have to provide water to almost 2 million people. The task ahead is almost impossible unless there is a short-term truce to allow humanitarian aid in,
right,
and to stop the conflict.
And would that key element be the Egyptians being involved in terms of opening that Rafah crossing in the south and allowing, I guess, an aid corridor in from northern Egypt and the Sinai?
I mean, yes, of course, we're speaking with a lot of aid agencies and organizations that aid is going to that part of Egypt, and Egypt have promised the UN that they will allow the aid in. But this is what I've been hearing since Monday. We're now on Friday. There's been several attempts being made. However, the Gaza side of the border has been bombed several times in purpose to stop aid going in from that side. So this is another issue that we're facing, that there are partners in the world that are willing to put aid into Gaza, but unfortunately, from the Israeli side at the moment, they're not allowing this to happen.
Attica Rahman from the Global Relief Trust, thank you for joining us once again and updating us on your assessment of the humanitarian situation. Thank you.
Coming up very shortly, we will be bringing you a press conference between the US Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, and his Israeli counterpart, Yoav Gallant, as Mr. Austin also takes part in those diplomatic talks. You are with The Live Desk.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GBNews.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GBNews,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday.
Live to Tel Aviv and the news conference with the Israeli Defence Minister Yoav Gallant and also Lloyd Austin, the US Secretary of Defence.
Our operations. Defense cooperation and US support in the Pentagon, in the White House, in the Congress, ensure freedom of operation and enforce our capabilities. We receive the second aircraft carrying essential munition to the IDF. U.S. deployment of assets on land, in air.
Well, apologies that we do have a problem with the microphones there in Tel Aviv with the feed we're getting from there, but we'll update you on what's being said between the two defence ministers on another key meeting. Just to remind you, we have the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken having gone to Qatar, also on his way to Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. So there is this last-minute flurry of diplomatic activity. We'll try and dip back in and see if we can get a better sound for you.
Our neighbors is Hamas, the ISIS of Gaza, an organization...
The microphones there in Tel Aviv. So our apologies for that. It's beyond our control. It's actually the sound source there at this news conference, but we'll try to get a better link. Just to update you, as I was saying, in terms of the United States involvement, both Lloyd Austin and Antony Blinken there in the region ahead of what may occur on the ground, of course, in Gaza, talking to, first of all, Mahmoud Abbas from the Palestinian Authority, then going to Qatar, also in Amman, speaking to King Abdullah of Jordan, and also Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. So the whole diplomatic round underway in this key stage ahead of any military involvement on the ground.
And you are looking at pictures of the Israeli Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, and he is the man who warned this week that Israel will eliminate everything. They will regret it, he warned Hamas.
The other phrase he used was complete siege. This was the phrase that was taken into account by the United Nations as to whether this was a lawful act as such under international law in terms of the humanitarian effect. But, of course, this is, as Mr. Gallant and Benjamin Netanyahu said, an act of war in terms of what Hamas has done to Israel, and therefore it was acting accordingly. We'll head back to Tel Aviv when we get better communications for you.
The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has been on the island of Gotland near Sweden this morning, attending the Joint Expeditionary Force Summit of Northern European countries.
Well, it's the first time that a Prime Minister has stayed overnight on a Royal Naval vessel, a frigate, I think. He had a breakfast then with members on board HMS Diamond before the proper job of the day, holding bilateral meetings with Swedish, Danish leaders, other North European leaders. Let's get more with Olivia Utley, our political correspondent. And Olivia, certainly it's a difficult time for all European nations in terms of Ukraine and what's happening in the Middle East. And I'm basically looking at these watchwords that terrorism should have no truck.
Well, absolutely. And of course, we were all expecting this Joint Expeditionary Force meeting, which is Rishi Sunak meeting with 10 other Northern European leaders, to be focusing on the situation in Russia and Ukraine. But clearly the events in the Middle East have sort of overshadowed that. So this morning, Rishi Sunak has been serving breakfast to troops on board HMS Diamond. And then he's been engaging in these bilateral meetings with the leaders of Denmark and Sweden. The rhetoric coming out of this meeting is very similar to what we've heard from Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, Emmanuel Macron as well, that these leaders have no truck with terrorism. Rishi Sunak has made clear that he stands with Israel. But for the first time this morning, we've been hearing a little bit of a note of caution. Yes, the Prime Minister absolutely stands by Israel, but he points out, and so does James Cleverly, so does Emmanuel Macron, that in a democracy, it's essential to be proportionate in response. And it seems as though, reading between the lines a little bit, he's a bit warning the Israeli government about this ground attack that they seem to be planning, that they should make sure that as many Palestinians as possible, ordinary Palestinian citizens, are able to escape. And Israel seems to have listened to that and is now suggesting that 1.1 million Palestinians should be able to get out before this ground strike happens, if it does.
And just to reflect on some other words, I think he had, Number 10 indicating an extra £3 million to provide security for the UK's Jewish population, with, of course, growing concerns about anti-Semitic comments and attacks here in Britain.
Yes, absolutely. We've heard the horrible news today that multiple Jewish schools in London have had to close today for fear of anti-Semitic attacks. So Rishi Sunak is putting some money into this and trying to stop these tensions which seem to be building up. We saw last week what happened in London with people unable to get to the Israeli embassy to pay their respects because of the Free Palestine protest. So Rishi Sunak is putting his money where his mouth is, if you like, on this, and is pledging money to support the Jewish community in London and elsewhere in the UK.
Olivia, thank you. Let's go straight back to Tel Aviv. This press conference being given by Israel's Defence Minister Yoav Gallant and his US counterpart Lloyd Austin.
As the U.S. Secretary of Defense, I am here in person to make something crystal clear. America's support for Israel is ironclad. And I extend my deepest condolences to the Israeli people for those killed or wounded in this terrible slaughter by Hamas. I'm also here in solidarity with all the families still living the waking nightmare of not knowing the fate of their loved ones. And we will continue to coordinate closely with Israel to help secure the release of the innocent men, women, and children in the clutches of Hamas, including American citizens. Now, Israel is a small country, a place where everybody knows everybody. And in times of trial, the intimacy of your society deepens the intimacy of your grief. But that's not a weakness. It is a profound strength. And in times, you know what to do. Over this awful week, we've seen Israeli hotels and homes take in those who've had to flee. We've seen long lineups to donate blood. We've seen WhatsApps explode with messages as people race to support neighbors in anguish. And perhaps because I'm a retired general, I was especially moved by the story of a retired general named Noam Tebow. His son called him on Saturday from his home near Gaza to say that Hamas terrorists had stormed their kibbutz and were closing in. And the retired general jumped into his car in Tel Aviv and raced toward the combat zone. Linked up with other fighters and rescued his son, his daughter-in-law, and his granddaughters. And when the general arrived at their house, one of his granddaughters just said, "Grandpa's here." These are rays of hope in a terrible week. And in times like these, sometimes the best thing that a friend can do is just to show up and to get to work. Now, this is no time for neutrality or for false equivalence or for excuses for the inexcusable. There is never any justification for terrorism. And that's especially true after this rampage by Hamas. And anyone who wants lasting peace and security for this region must condemn and isolate Hamas. Hamas does not speak for the Palestinian people or their legitimate hopes for dignity, security, and statehood and peace alongside Israel. As a former commander of Central Command, the deliberate cruelty of Hamas vividly reminds me of ISIS. Bloodthirsty, fanatical, and hateful. And like ISIS, Hamas has nothing to offer but zealotry, bigotry, and death. The world has just witnessed a great evil. The deadliest attack on civilians in the history of the state of Israel, and the bloodiest day in Jewish history since the end of the Holocaust. So make no mistake, the United States will make sure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself. And Israel has a right to protect its people. You know, in their many phone calls this week, President Biden has told Prime Minister Netanyahu that the United States would also respond swiftly and decisively to such a massive terrorist assault. And the president also underscored that democracies like ours are stronger and more secure when we uphold the laws of war. Terrorists like Hamas deliberately target civilians, but democracies don't. This is a time for resolve and not revenge, for purpose and not panic, and for security and not surrender. At President Biden's direction, we have moved urgently to respond to this crisis and to send a strong message of deterrence. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group is now in the region, led by the largest aircraft carrier in the world. We've augmented U.S. fighter aircraft squadrons in the Middle East, and the U.S. Department of Defense stands fully ready to deploy additional assets if necessary. As President Biden has said, for any country, for any group, or anyone thinking about trying to take advantage of this atrocity, to try to widen the conflict or to spill more blood, we have just one word: don't. The world is watching, and so are we. And we aren't going anywhere. We will remain in close contact with our valued partners across the region, and security assistance from the Department of Defense is already rapidly flowing into Israel. That includes munitions and air defense capabilities and other equipment and resources. It also includes more interceptors for Iron Dome to save Israeli lives. And we will continue to ensure that Israel has what it needs to keep itself secure. Now, Hamas attacked at a time of global challenge. But the United States is the most powerful country in the world. And we remain fully able to project power and uphold our commitments and direct resources to multiple theaters. So we will stand with Israel, even as we stand with Ukraine. The United States can walk and chew gum at the same time. and U.S. security assistance to Israel will flow in at the speed of war. And as this harrowing week draws to a close, and as Shabbat draws near, we stand together, and we stand strong. The United States has Israel's back, and that is not negotiable, and it never will be. And after this terrible week, I wish you and all the people of Israel Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
We'll be starting with the questions, starting with Alon Ben-David, Channel 13.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Your presence in the Eastern Mediterranean clearly projects power, but should Israel be attacked from the north, from Hezbollah in Lebanon, will you be willing to exercise your force and join the fighting?
I ordered additional assets to the region to bolster deterrence. And again, the message that we would send to any country or group thinking to take advantage of this situation and widen the conflict, don't. I won't speculate on anything that could happen in the future. I will just tell you clearly that the United States will continue to support Israel's right to defend itself.
Thank you. And please a question to the Defense Minister. השר גלנט, דיברת בתחילת השבוע על כך שהמטרה של המבצע היא למחוק את חמאס. ואזרחי ישראל שואלים את עצמם מה המשמעות של זה. האם תוכל להסביר לנו מה אתה מקווה להשיג במהלך הצבאי שלך ואיך הוא אמור להסתיים, באיזה מצב חמאס יימצא?
אנחנו נמוטט את שלטון החמאס, אנחנו נחסל את היכולת הצבאית של חמאס.
So Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, replying to that question in Hebrew, he earlier had said that the path ahead will be long, but Israel will win the war. And some very pointed comments then from Lloyd Austin, just to remind you, he is a retired general commander, indicating that even though this is not a time for neutrality or equivalence, he said, it must be resolve, not revenge, purpose, not panic. In terms of Israel's reaction to what had taken place.
Yes, he said that democracies do not deliberately target civilians, and they are stronger. Democracies like the United States and Israel, he says, are stronger when they uphold the laws of war. Let's go back to this press conference.
Its counterattacks and perhaps a ground invasion. Do you believe the moral culpability for those Palestinian deaths belongs to Israel, Hamas, or both?
I'll leave it to Israel to talk about its potential plans and its approach to conducting operations. Matt, I'll just say again that Israel has a right to defend itself, and we will support Israel's right to defend itself. We will continue to flow in security assistance, and I've worked with Israeli forces over the years, over many years. As you know, I wore a uniform for 41 years. My experience in working with the Israeli forces is they are professional, they're disciplined, and they're focused on the right things. And so I expect that going forward, they will continue to exhibit that same degree of professionalism that we've seen in the past. But you know, Matt, we've seen this before. The international community fought ISIS, who in some cases was embedded deeply in built-up areas, and that international coalition fought valiantly and protected civilians and created corridors for humanitarian movement, even in the midst of a pretty significant fight. So again, this is a professional force. It is well led. And I have every expectation that it will be disciplined.
Thank you. And for Minister Gallant, have you seen evidence that Iran was directly involved in planning or executing the recent attack on your country, or any signs that either Iran or its proxies are seeking to exploit the situation? And if you do come to see signs of an imminent attack on Israel, are you in favor of preemptive strikes?
Iran, Hezbollah and Hamas is one axis. an axis of evil. Everything is directed generally from Iran. The permission is given by Iran. The money is supplied by Iran. And the ideas are shaped in Iran. Therefore, it doesn't matter if they give or didn't give the permission, but the idea is an Iranian idea. As to the actions, future actions of IDF, I will stay confidential for good reasons.
Thank you.
Suleiman Masada.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for this. House Foreign Affairs Chair Mike McCall said that we know that Egypt had warned Israel 3 days prior to that event, like something like this could happen. We don't know how we missed it. We don't know how Israel missed it. So can you tell us what really the U.S. knew before this attack?
What I can tell you is that if we had known or if we know of a pending attack against an ally, we would clearly inform that ally. But what we're focused on now, Suleiman, is we're focused on making sure that Israel has what it needs to defend its sovereign territory and to protect its citizens. And the minister and I spent a good bit of time talking today about what those requirements are and what we need to do to urgently meet those needs.
אדוני השר, תודה רבה. זו פעם ראשונה שדרג מדיני עולה לשאלות העיתונאים. אתמול שמענו את הרמטכ"ל גם לוקח אחריות ואומר אנחנו כשלנו בשמירה על ביטחון אזרחי ישראל. האם יש כן גם אזרחי ישראל שואלים את עצמם, האם כן יש איזושהי לקיחת אחריות מצד הדרג המדיני?
Well, another question in Hebrew there for Yoav Gallant, but just to remind you what he said a few minutes ago in terms of the wider picture. He said Iran, Hezbollah and Hamas was one axis of evil. He said that the permission and money came from Iran, the ideas came from Iran. This was an Iranian idea, even though there was obviously no direct indication of Iran triggering the attacks coming over from Gaza, but an indication that he said he would keep under wraps the strategy for the future. But clearly this is a man that does have perhaps a plan in place.
And while we are hearing from that press conference, we are getting word that the most senior Hezbollah official to speak publicly about the violence so far, he has said that the group Hezbollah would not be swayed by calls for it to stay on the sidelines. And Hezbollah, prescribed terrorist group, is fully ready to contribute to the fighting. Let's return to this press conference.
Do you feel or might be helpful in this case, especially dealing with that whole urban situation that you just referred to, the evacuation of civilians from Gaza, those kind of challenges? What kind of ideas and thoughts that you have that you can share, please?
Well, thanks, Tom. I would tell you that encountering ISIS, I felt as if we were staring evil in the eye. It was truly evil. And what we've seen from Hamas, it takes that evil to another level. And so that's the first thing that we need to remember and consider. There are a number of things that we talked about today. That there are some lessons learned that we'd be more than happy to share with our allies here in terms of operating effectively in dense urban terrain, creating safe humanitarian corridors, making sure that we're thoughtful about how we shape the battle. And making sure that our objectives are well defined, and so we'll continue to share the lessons that we've learned over the years. And of course, as the Israelis prosecute this fight, we will learn lessons from them. And so I think it's this great teamwork that has served us both well over the years, and we'll continue that.
Mr. Minister, there's been some confusion over the 24-hour deadline that Israel announced for civilians in Gaza to move south, to evacuate and move south. There was a 24-hour deadline initially. reported, and then there's been reports that Israel has modified that, have left it open. In other words, not sticking to 24 hours of a deadline. Would you please clarify specifically, is there going to be a deadline? What can you tell us about the deadline? And what will Israel do, if anything, to help civilians move? Some of the people have said, that's Hamas's problem. It's not our problem.
Well, first of all, I would like to remind all of us what happened less than a week ago. 1,200 Israelis were brutally murdered, raped, burned alive. Kids were tied one to the other and shot at their hand. This is Hamas. This is the ISIS of Gaza. And as the secretary said, they took evil to another level. That's first issue. Second, Israel never and ever will not shoot civilians in purpose. Therefore, we are asking all the civilians in Gaza City to go south of Gaza. And the reason is that because we don't want to harm them. The camouflage of the terrorists is the civil population. Therefore, we need to separate them. So those who want to save their life, please go south. We are going to destroy Hamas infrastructures, Hamas headquarters, Hamas military establishment, and take this phenomena out of Gaza and out of the earth. They cannot live among human, civilized people.
But 24 hours, is that deadline still holding, the 24 hours?
Thank you very much. We're done today. Thank you.
It appears that news conference at an end with a handshake. Yoav Gallant there declining to comment on this idea of the deadline for those people in Gaza, but indicating, he said, that the camouflage of the terrorist was the civilian population and that they would go after the infrastructure of Gaza. They cannot live amongst civilians, he said.
The Israeli Defence Minister appeared to be making a direct appeal to civilians in Gaza, telling them to go south. He said Israel will not shoot civilians on purpose. It will destroy the Hamas infrastructure. He also said Hamas is the ISIS of Gaza and echoed what Lloyd Austin, his US counterpart, said when he said that Hamas had taken evil to another level.
Just to remind you that Lloyd Austin, a former US general, commander, and had been involved in the fight against the forces of ISIS, he said, he reminds me of ISIS, bloodthirsty, fanatical, and hateful. Well, let's just bring you the skyline shots we're getting from Gaza and indeed I think the south of Israel, because we did have reports yet again of rocket fire from Gaza into Ashkelon in the south of Israel, despite the continued air assault overnight by Israeli forces. Indications, of course, that in terms of the way that Hamas is organised in Gaza, much of its infrastructure may well be below ground in a system of tunnels, which is where they have previously kept their munitions and missiles, and therefore it will be a very difficult operation that Yoav Gallant has been referring to in terms of going in and dismantling Hamas as an organisation in Gaza.
Thousands upon thousands of people in Gaza City are trying to frantically flee south. They're going on the backs of trucks, they're going on foot, following that Israeli warning that civilians should move south. There are over 1 million people living in those northern areas. They've been told to leave in the next day, although Yoav Gallant didn't actually confirm whether there was a 24-hour deadline for that. The Israeli military, though, says they know it will take longer than a day to escape, but has blamed Hamas for telling people to ignore the call to move. Do stay with us. You are with the Live Desk on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Bit of a north-south split today. Some heavy bursts of rain over parts of England and Wales. Something a bit brighter, but colder for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Two areas of low pressure dominating. This one's been bringing some very heavy rain across parts of South Wales and will continue to do so, particularly on this weather front through the rest of today. We do have a Met Office yellow warning in place covering a large part of England and Wales. In the south and east, still pretty warm and still generally dry through much of the afternoon. Just a few showers here. Brighter skies further north, but with some blustery showers and a chilly feel. Temperatures struggling to get into the teens. One more day where we could see temperatures over 20 degrees across the southeast. But heavy rain continuing for South Wales, southwest England into the afternoon, then spreading into the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast through the evening. So a lot of spray and surface water on the roads. Then it gets very windy across the Northern Isles during this evening and overnight. Very gusty conditions here. Elsewhere it turns clearer and a colder night, much colder than we've been used to across the south, well down into single figures. Saturday will be a mixture of sunshine and showers. Much of eastern England, eastern Scotland will stay dry, but blustery showers in the far north. And then we'll see some showers coming into Wales, western England, western Scotland and Northern Ireland. There will be some snow over the hills of northern Scotland as well. And a chillier feel everywhere, with temperatures struggling to get into the teens. Goodbye.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it is 1 o'clock. This is the live desk here on GB News. Coming up this Friday lunchtime.
US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said there is no time for neutrality or excuses. He meets his Israeli counterpart in Tel Aviv, saying there should be resolve and not revenge as Israel drops thousands of leaflets on Gaza, warning more than 1 million civilians they must move south for their own safety.
Here, fears for a backlash as 3 Jewish schools in North London shut with growing fears of violence. One head teacher warns parents to keep their children indoors.
The Prime Minister meets other European leaders in Sweden and warns that terrorism must not be allowed to prevail in Ukraine or in the Middle East.
We also want to bring you these live shots from Sana'a in Yemen, and they are showing, well, crowds of people protesting in solidarity with the people of Gaza. Those people in Gaza, those civilians fleeing northern Gaza by car at the moment, around 1 million of them have been told to head south. Those are the latest pictures we are getting from Yemen as people protest in support of them.
Yeah, this the scene outside UNICEF's headquarters in the capital there, with those Palestinian flags being held aloft. We'll update you, of course, on what is being said and indeed the reaction there. But first, let's get an update on all the headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thanks very much, and good afternoon from the GB newsroom at 1:01. Israel has been dropping leaflets in Gaza warning residents to move for their own safety and to distance themselves from Hamas terrorists who they say are using civilians as human shields. 1.1 million residents have been told to move to the south within the next 24 hours. The United Nations says such a move is impossible without devastating humanitarian consequences. The First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, has posted a video on social media from his mother-in-law this morning, a retired nurse who's in Gaza.
Everybody from Gaza is moving towards where we are. 1 million people, no food, no water. And still they're bombing them as they leave. Where are we going to put them? But my thought is, all these people in the hospital cannot be evacuated. Where's humanity? Where's people's hearts in the world to let this happen in this day and age? And may God help us.
The Israel Defense Forces continue to amass tanks and soldiers near the Gaza Strip border, with a ground invasion looking increasingly likely. Tension is also building on Israel's northern border with Lebanon, with IDF troops bracing for the militant group Hezbollah to open up a second front in the war. The US Secretary of State met the Palestinian president this morning in Jordan. Anthony Blinken is touring Middle Eastern countries, trying to stop the Israel-Hamas war spilling over into neighbouring countries. The meeting comes after Mahmoud Abbas condemned violence against civilians last night, after having previously failed to do so. Palestinian state media reports he told the Secretary of State he rejects the forced displacement of Palestinians in Gaza. Some North London Jewish schools are closed today over concerns for the children's safety amid the Israel-Hamas war. It's reported 3 Jewish schools in North London told parents they would not reopen until Monday. Meanwhile, Number 10 has announced an additional £3 million of funding to go towards providing extra security for the UK's Jewish population. It comes as the Jewish security charity CST recorded a 40% increase in anti-Semitic incidents since the outbreak of conflict in Israel. A teacher has been killed and 2 others injured in a knife attack in France. The attack happened at a high school in the city of Arras in the north of the country. Local media reported the attacker shouting Allahu Akbar, although it's not been independently verified. A suspect has been arrested and France's anti-terrorism office say they're now investigating. The EU is investigating the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, after disinformation was spread in the wake of the Hamas terror attacks. In a letter sent to the platform's owner, Elon Musk, the European Commission said there were indications that X is being used to disseminate illegal content, despite being flagged by authorities. Elon Musk says the Commission should list its examples publicly, even after various media reports of questionable content. The investigation is the first under the EU's new tech rules on harmful content. The Prime Minister is in Sweden today, meeting with Northern European allies. Leaders were expected to focus on the threat from Russia, but the gathering has been overshadowed by the conflict in Israel and Gaza. Rishi Sunak reminded the summit they are the first line of defence across much of the region. Nigel Farage has been rebanked, in other news, for personal and business accounts. Lloyds has accepted the GB News presenter after 10 other banks rejected him. Mr Farage was involved in a public row with NatWest in July after the group closed his bank accounts due to his apparent political views. He said he's pleased to see one high street lender isn't politically prejudiced. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's over to Mark and Pip.
Thanks very much, Tamsin. In the last half an hour, we have heard from the US Secretary of Defence, Lloyd Austin, giving a press conference with his Israeli counterpart, Yoav Gallant, who claims that Hamas, Iran and Hezbollah are an axis of evil.
Well, of course, the news conference coming after 1 million Palestinians in Gaza had been told to move to the south of the Gaza Strip, with those leaflets being dropped from the air below the Wadi Gaza. Well, Mr Austin warning that there should be resolve and not revenge in some pointed comments there at this news conference. Let's get more with our reporter Charlie Peters, who's in Tel Aviv for us. And Charlie, an indication, of course, from the United States yet again that we have your back was the phrase that was used once more by Lloyd Austin, of course, a former US general, but also some pointed comments talking of resolve, not revenge, purpose, not panic.
And yes, and in the last few minutes after that press conference ended, rocket sirens have sounded extensively across northern Israel, in the northern town of Haifa and another location closer to the southern Lebanese border. And I think this is an area where American support is going to be absolutely key, because we do know that American military hardware is replenishing the Iron Dome air defense system. This is the system that allows Israel to intercept and destroy rockets being fired in from enemy locations, such as in the Gaza Strip, where Hamas terrorists have fired, possibly closing into tens of thousands of rockets since Saturday morning, where they fired off 4,500 in one day, but also rockets and missiles coming in from southern Lebanon, which is the likely source of the rocket attack. That is unconfirmed, but sirens are up in the last few minutes now. So replenishing that air defense system is vital, because it doesn't work all the time. It has a 90% success rate over the last week. In the last hour, some rockets hit the town of Ashkelon, close to the border in the Gaza Strip, where a barrage is thought to have overwhelmed the air defense system in the last couple of hours. Rockets reached as far as central Israel here in Tel Aviv over the last few days, and interceptions have been going on constantly in southern Israel enduring those barrages. And of course, Israel is striking back on the Gaza Strip on locations that it describes as Hamas military capabilities, air defense systems, and also bunkers and shelters where it says terrorists are sheltering and preparing to launch new attacks.
Charlie, what you just said about those rockets coming in from Lebanon, this is, you're telling us this as we are hearing that the Hezbollah deputy chief is speaking and has said that the party Hezbollah is fully ready to contribute to the fighting. And this is the big fear, isn't it? That Hezbollah will now see an opportunity to get involved and this war will open up on another front.
That's right, and they already have been getting involved, confirming some of their fighters dying in clashes with Israeli Defense Forces since Sunday night. Indeed, some Israeli soldiers have also fallen in that combat, including members of their elite special forces in the Northern Territories. We have seen Israel trying to prevent other parties entering this conflict, such as the bombardment on the Syrian international airports yesterday, which reports suggested were conducted in order to send a warning to Iranian proxies in the region: do not interfere. That, of course, came after US President Joe Biden issued a message to other onlookers in this conflict who may be tempted by the sight of a creaking and bruised Israel. He said, if you're thinking of joining this conflict, don't. Well, it seems like now some parties may be ignoring that warning from Joe Biden.
As you say, Charlie, these reports of the sirens in the north, we had rocket fire on Ashkelon in the south earlier today, but suffice to say, for Tel Aviv at the moment, it's a relative calm.
It is, but it's also an area where people are coming for shelter from all over the country and where other combatants are being sent out to fight. This is where Israel is gathering soldiers and gathering supplies and forcing them back onto the front lines to conduct those combat missions against multiple different adversaries. We're also seeing volunteers gathering here in great numbers to help the state repel invaders and rocket attacks alike. The army just can't meet the logistical demands expected of it since this existential threat to Israel arose last weekend. And so today we've been visiting people supplying meals to soldiers, but earlier in the week we saw people sending out body armour, boots, clothing, batteries, torches, all the basics that soldiers need to fight. The army can't provide it, so civilians are stepping up.
Charlie, thank you for that in Tel Aviv. Back to you, of course, throughout the afternoon to get an update.
We want to talk to journalist and contributor at the Jewish Chronicle, Sandy Rashti. Sandy, I understand, can join us now. Good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us here on the live desk. Sandy, first of all, can I get your reaction to the UN's appeal, where it is calling on Israel to withdraw the order for civilians in Gaza City, to get out and head south, because they say there are going to be devastating humanitarian consequences. What's your reaction to that?
Of course, there are going to be devastating humanitarian consequences. There's a loss of life, a huge loss of life. But what the British Jewish community is concerned about is, as the news cycle moves on, there's a loss and a forgetfulness of what initially happened and what initially started this. You know, there are still a huge number of people lost, missing, no one knows what happens to them in Israel, who've been taken from Israel to Gaza. That includes British nationals. There are children, there are women, there are young people, innocent civilians. And the British Jewish community really feels it. And it's difficult when the community is always asked, you know, do you condemn the actions of the Israeli government? What do you think about wider international political conflict? This isn't a regular war. This is a really, really awful, tragic, evil attack on the Jewish people. And it did not only happen in Israel. This is being felt across the world, including the UK.
Indeed, we heard the assessment there of Yoav Gallant, the defence minister, at that news conference about half an hour ago, talking about this axis of evil he called Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the ideas that they were fomenting. To that degree, what do you think the Israelis should be doing in terms of Gaza? Because clearly the fear is that the hostages are still within Gaza. It does look as if there will be some military operation. Will the hostages have to be part of their thinking?
There have been multiple people, Israelis, people living in the UK who know people who are kidnapped, and they are all saying the same thing. We are not in a position to tell the Israeli government, the Israeli army, what to do.
Yeah.
There is a crisis going on. There has been the most, it's not even been a week since we've seen the most evil. Please God, no one sees the pictures I've seen, the videos I've seen, the lists I've seen. But you know what most people have? Because it's all on social media. It's not going through the filter of mainstream media anymore. And there is a lot of fear and there is a lot of anxiety, and it should not be forgotten because it is also being felt in Britain. It's being felt strongly. Nothing compared to what's going on in Israel, but it's still being felt.
And Sandy, on that point, and I totally understand how excruciatingly difficult this is for the Jewish community. On that point, we've seen pictures of people in London putting up missing posters of the hostages that have been taken and are now, we understand, we hope, are in Gaza and are still alive. And those posters have been ripped down by individuals, perhaps pro-Palestinian supporters. What was your reaction when you heard that that was happening?
Well, not perhaps. They were pro-Palestinian reporters, because as they were ripping down the posters, they were saying, what about the people in Palestine? There is no moral equivalence. You know, there's almost some kind, at least I feel, and people I know have said the same, there's almost a feeling that people are taking pleasure in the killing of Jews. There have been sweets given out at protests. There have been celebrations. What are you celebrating? The death of Palestinians? The death of Israelis? The death that's going to come, as you mentioned at the start of this, the humanitarian crisis. What is going to celebrate? You know, what celebrations are going to happen?
And as we had Lloyd Austin saying, this is no time for neutrality or equivalence. But I just wondered if we could get your thoughts on the wider picture, because as you will know, we've got Antony Blinken having gone to Qatar, then Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. We're just learning, Reuters reporting that Saudi Arabia is trying to get a military pact requiring the United States to defend the kingdom. But here's the key: in return for opening ties with Israel, and will not hold up a deal even if Israel does not offer major concessions to the Palestinians. So could there well be a change in the diplomatic axis of evil, as we heard from Yoav Gallant, and there could be something positive to achieve from this in the long run?
In the lead up to this, there were, following the Abraham Accords, where Israel started having open, formal relations with Muslim majority countries, there were official open talks with the Saudis, and Iran came out and openly criticised it. You know, and some people have, well, I'm not going to speculate, but there are ongoing talks, and there have always been, you know, are not open relations with these countries, but since the relations have opened, there are significant Jewish communities in these countries. And if these accords actually mean anything, then yes, there should be more open, diplomatic, positive moves forward. But, you know, in terms of, if you were to look at positivity, the reaction of the community here in the UK has been unbelievable. There are schools being set up for Israelis now fleeing the crisis with newborns, for Brits who live in Israel fleeing the crisis, coming to the UK. There are schools set up with a Hebrew curriculum. There are doctors giving out prescriptions to people who need it. There are people shutting their shops in London, like seizing business, seizing trading, to set up points where they can collect for soldiers black hats, black thermals, battery packs, torches, as your reporter said earlier. There is a lot of good that you see in people, but I do think it's really important that people don't forget, as people have a habit of doing, what actually is still going on. It's not even been a week.
Sandy, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your reaction, and we hope to speak to you again soon, of course. Thank you very much indeed. Just to reiterate that breaking news we're getting from Reuters, reporting that Saudi Arabia trying to secure a military pact with the United States to defend the kingdom. But here's the key: in return for opening ties with Israel. So that might indicate why, indeed, Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, is travelling, we believe, to Saudi Arabia today, as well as Bahrain and Qatar.
You are with the Live Desk. Do stay with us here on GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back to the Live Desk. There's lots happening on the diplomatic front today, as well as obviously the humanitarian and military front. Just to remind you, Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, heading to Qatar, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. And we've just had this news conference with Lloyd Austin, the US Defence Secretary, with Yoav Gallant, with some interesting comments from Lloyd Austin, saying there should be resolve, not revenge, purpose, not panic. Well, we've got Rishi Sunak speaking with other European leaders in Sweden today. Let's get more with our political correspondent Olivia Utley joining us, because the language being used in all these occasions is quite important. It's a pointer. There is a bit more caution coming into what these politicians are saying.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, Mark. For the last few days, we've seen the Prime Minister, the US Secretary of State, Emmanuel Macron, the French President, all saying completely non-equivocally that they stand behind Israel. Well, they are still saying that today, but for the first time, we are seeing this note of caution, as you put it. Rishi Sunak was saying this morning that, yes, he stands 100% behind Israel, but the response has got to be... Israel should make sure that as many Palestinian lives and ordinary Palestinian lives are saved. Emmanuel Macron said that the response must be strong but just. And I think that's the message that we're getting very, very strongly today from both European leaders and from the US. Yes, they are 100% with Israel, but they are very, very worried about the risk of massive escalation if and when Israel launches this ground attack that we are expecting. Alicia Kearns, she's a backbencher MP, but she is chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, has actually gone even further than either Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer. And she said that Israel has to turn, those were her words, has to turn the water and electricity back on in Gaza, because she believes that Israel has a duty to do so under humanitarian law. So we are beginning to see that little note of caution creeping in, although that in no way undermines the complete support that Rishi Sunak has been offering to Israel.
Caution creeping in as we hear from aid agencies telling us about the crisis, the developing disaster on the ground in Gaza. And some of them are already saying, look, there is already a violation of international law happening.
Exactly, and I think that's perhaps what Alicia Kearns was suggesting in her warning to Israel that they must turn on the electricity and water in Gaza. It seems as though leaders across the world are now getting very, very worried about the idea of a massive escalation and the possibility that Hamas, which the Foreign Secretary said that Hamas has enmeshed itself in ordinary Palestinian lives. So, of course, what leaders are very worried about is Israel has said that it wants to essentially obliterate Hamas, but in doing so, they're very worried that lots of Palestinian lives could be lost and the tensions could just continue to escalate.
I mean, we should reflect, of course, as the Israelis have indicated they may well turn those taps back on in terms of the fuel and the water if the hostages are released. And we did have Grant Shapps during the morning round, the Defence Secretary, saying that it was very likely, I think was the phrase he had, that British hostages were being held in Gaza.
Yes, absolutely. So Israel is at the moment waiting to see if these hostages get released, including, it sounds very much as though there are some British citizens among them, before making that decision over whether to turn the water and electricity back on. So it's a very, very tense situation at the moment. But we are hearing this note from foreign leaders across the world that Israel must do everything it can to try and save ordinary Palestinian lives, which is very difficult when, as James cleverly says, Hamas is so ingrained in the Palestinian population, is so intertwined with the population itself, that trying to obliterate Hamas without risking Palestinian lives is going to be very, very difficult indeed for Israel. And it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out, and if and when those hostages are released, whether we see a little bit of softening from the Israeli government.
Rishi Sunak has also commented on what appears to be, sadly, the number of anti-Semitic incidents that are taking place here in the UK. He says it's a disgusting rise. And we've heard that, you know, there are several schools, Jewish schools in North London, which are closed today because they're so worried about the safety of the students.
Yes, I think it's 4 Jewish schools that have had to close in London today, and there are Jewish parents all over social media saying that, you know, they didn't feel as though taking their Jewish child to primary school should be an act of bravery, but today it feels as though it is. And of course, in the wake of those protests last week, when almost no one was able to get to the Israeli embassy to pay their respects because of these huge Free Palestine protests, the restaurant in Golders Green in a very heavily Jewish part of North London, which was the front was smashed in. There is increasing concern among the UK government that the rise in anti-Semitic attacks is not going to stop.
Olivia, thank you very much indeed for that. And just to remind you, we've got the skyline there of Gaza. We're just getting more from Reuters saying that the Israeli military say they've intercepted more rockets fired from Gaza, but this time at northern Israel, which is quite significant. Let's bring in now military historian and author Peter Caddick-Adams. And Peter, clearly there's much fear about what Hezbollah may do in the north coming over from Lebanon, but we've got this strange situation now that rockets fired from Gaza at northern Israel. It's becoming a very difficult, confused situation.
Yeah, I mean, containment is everything, and the real worry is that this will spread. The significant thing is that Hezbollah did not launch the attack at the same time as Hamas, which indicates they were not included in the planning process. And they must be pretty annoyed about that. I mean, there are splits within all these different Palestine military and political organizations.
Yeah.
So what's happened with Hezbollah is I think they've come to the party late. They certainly don't have the sort of military ability to suddenly attack Israel in the way that Hamas did, because the big element here was surprise. And they've lost that quite clearly because the Israelis are now on the defensive.
Are you actually surprised, bearing in mind we had Yoav Gallant just about half an hour ago saying Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, one axis of evil? I mean, it does seem they weren't at the table when this actually all kicked off.
Yeah, I don't think they were at all. I think there's too much effort being put into roping Iran directly into this. Yes, it's in Iran's advantage. But I don't think Iran was involved in the planning process, and there may have been Iranian instructors there, but I don't think they specifically were there to launch an attack on the 7th of October. I think they've been there for a long time, and the supply of weapons too has been coming, facilitated by the Iranians, but not specifically for this date. This is a Hamas choice itself.
Everything we are hearing at the moment, the analysis, it seems to suggest that perhaps Israel is being drawn into a trap here by launching this ground offensive. This is playing into the hands of Hamas. It's playing into the hands of Hezbollah. It's creating this instability, huge instability, which is what they crave.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You've hit the nail on the head there, because Hamas would have known that if you poke the wasp's nest like this, you're going to get a really, really violent reaction. There can be no surprise anywhere in the Gaza Strip from any of the militants who launched the attack that this would be Israel's response. And so the war is now being fought on two levels. One is in and around Gaza, but the other is what's going to happen internationally in the region.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why the West sent other forces, naval forces, and levels.
Peter, I think we've lost the signal with you there, but thank you for your analysis of the latest situation. As we were saying, we've got these reports from the Israeli military that we've got these rockets fired at northern Israel, but from Gaza in the south, rather than over the border from Lebanon, as Peter was reflecting. Key question, what Hezbollah will do or won't do.
Very shortly, we will be joined by the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. Do stay with us here on the live desk. First, though, let's get all your headlines with Tamsin.
Pip, thank you. Here are the headlines at 1:32. Israel's defence minister has described the Hamas terror group as an axis of evil with Iran. Yoav Gallant spoke after Israel dropped leaflets in Gaza warning residents to leave and distance themselves from Hamas terrorists. 1.1 million residents have been told to move to the south within 24 hours for their own safety. The United Nations warns it's impossible without devastating humanitarian consequences. Meanwhile, the siege of Gaza continues, with Palestinian authorities saying more than 1,500 people have now been killed. That's after Hamas killed 1,300 people and took over 100 hostages, including British nationals. A teacher has been killed and 2 others injured in a knife attack in France. The attack happened at a high school in the city of Arras in the north of the country. Local media report the attacker shouted Allahu Akbar, although that's not been independently verified. A suspect has been arrested and France's anti-terrorism office say they're now investigating. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is in Sweden today, meeting with Northern European allies. Leaders at the summit were expected to focus on the threat from Russia, but the gathering's been overshadowed by the conflict in Israel and Gaza. And in other news, Nigel Farage has been rebanked for personal and business accounts. Lloyds has accepted the GB News presenter after 10 other banks rejected him. Nigel Farage was involved in a public row with NatWest in July after the group closed his bank accounts, apparently due to his political views. He says he's pleased to see one high street lender isn't politically prejudiced. Those are the top stories, and you can, of course, get more on all of the headlines. Just visit our website, gbnews.com.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Live Desk. Let's bring you straight to the latest pictures we're getting from the Reuters news agency within Gaza of people leaving with their cars loaded with personal items, it seems, and families, as you can see in the back of that estate car. This follows, of course, this leaflet drop from the Israeli Defense Force urging people to leave the northern area of Gaza City and head south.
There are some 1 million people in Gaza City who have been given 24 hours to leave, although, interestingly, in this press conference earlier, the Israeli Defence Minister didn't really say whether or not that 24-hour deadline was absolute or whether it would be allowed to pass. But you can see there people fleeing to the south of the Gaza Strip for their safety and protection. But the UN and the World Health Organization is criticising this warning from Israel, this leaflet drop, because they say the humanitarian impact is going to be massive.
Yeah, and interestingly now we have a senior US State Department official indicating that Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, when he was meeting Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday, had discussed the need to establish what they were calling safe areas in Gaza where civilians could relocate. The latest we're getting from that State Department official is that the US is engaging with both the Red Cross and the UN relief agencies to figure out, is a phrase they use there, what that might look like. So clearly that is in discussion at the moment. We'll update you as we get more from Reuters that's been speaking to that state official.
Well, joining us now is Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, Fleur Hassan Nahum. Good afternoon to you. Thanks for talking to us. Just bring us up to date with what is happening in Jerusalem. Has it remained quiet over the last few days? Has there been any trouble?
Well, last night, actually, there was an attack by a gunman on a police station, and he seriously injured a policeman, an Israeli policeman, who's still in hospital, probably be there for a while. But mostly there's been kind of a tense quiet in Jerusalem over the last week. We're on alert. We've reinforced security patrols, and we're hoping that there won't be another front opened up here. For the most part, the 40% population of Jerusalem that is Muslim Arab are peace-loving people, but you have radicals, you have Hamas sleeper cells, you have a lot of that as well. So we have to keep our eyes on the ball and make sure that things don't get out of hand, because the last thing we need is another front right here in our city.
And some relief, perhaps, Fleur, that with this day of prayer, that's not occurred as far as we're aware, that things have been relatively calm and that people have been able to go about their business.
That's what we feared, because we've seen scenes when Hamas want to create trouble on Temple Mount. They really know how to do that. And thank God today, things have been relatively calm, yes.
Looking at the wider picture, clearly we've got things developing all the time, and we had this news conference with Yoav Gallant and Lloyd Austin, the US Defense Secretary. I just wondered what you made of Lloyd Austin's comments about resolve, not revenge, and purpose, not panic, clearly when there is this worry about how things may develop in Gaza.
Well, I agree with him on the resolve, not revenge. And I've been saying already for 3 days in the press that Israel is not a country out for revenge. First of all, the most important thing is to bring back our 150 innocent hostages. There are women, there are children, there are elderly. My friend's son has been kidnapped. He lost an arm. They shot it off. And we're really, really fearful for his health. And also if hopefully he can be released. He's an American citizen. There are British citizens in there. These people did nothing. They went to a party. There was the majority of the people being held hostage in Gaza, young women there who we have reports that have been routinely raped. It's a horror what they've done to us. It's a massacre that we experienced last Saturday. And any country, any sovereign country needs to react. We cannot give in to terrorism, and we can't let this bordering country that is run by a terrorist organization called Hamas, that is a puppet of Iran, we cannot let them terrorize our citizens. It's our most basic obligation to our people.
So, Fleur, would you like to see the rescue of the hostages prioritised before
Absolutely.
the ground offensive?
I would love anything to happen in order to bring back these hostages. And I think that if Hamas care about their own people, which they've proved over the last 15 years that they don't really care about their own people, because otherwise they wouldn't have launched rockets into Israel for 15 whole years. If they actually want to think strategically, they should release the hostages, and maybe the war won't be as horrible as it might end up being. Israel never wants to hurt innocent civilians. The reason we've told people to move down to the south is because we don't want innocent civilians in Gaza in harm's way. We are more considerate of their civilians than their own government are. It's a ridiculous situation. There's no other way. No country would tolerate this. Unfortunately, war is ugly. And in any war, you're going to have innocents being killed. The Britain wouldn't have won the Second World War if they hadn't carpet bombed Dresden. Do you think there weren't German innocents that also died there? Of course they were, but that's not what Britain intended to do.
Fleur, do you accept, though, that
war? It is a civilizational war.
Fleur, I just wanted to ask you, do you accept that, yes, Israel has given that warning to people in Gaza, but actually the practicalities of it are just impossible?
Well, you've seen everybody leave. You've seen people moving. You've seen people in cars. So people are leaving.
Do you think 1 million plus people can leave and get out?
Anything's possible. And let's not forget that they have a border. Gaza has a border with Egypt. Now, they're not at war with Egypt. They declared war on Israel. And just like Britain and many other countries in continental Europe opened their doors when the Ukraine war started, why can't Egypt open a humanitarian corridor? Why is it on us, the attacked, to help our aggressor?
Fleur Hassan Nahum from Jerusalem, Deputy Mayor there. Thank you very much indeed for updating us, and we hope to speak to you again soon. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Let's now bring in Robert Fox, Defence Editor at the Evening Standard, who will be with us for the next hour or so. And Robert, just to pick up on something that Fleur was talking of there, is it doable to rescue the hostages? I mean, the Israelis do have this specialist unit, Sayeret Matkal. Indeed, Benjamin Netanyahu was a member of it with his brother at one time, directly involved.
It's not time to dwell on past glories. It is very, very difficult. Even the rescue, the Entebbe raid, was so totally different. They knew where everybody was then. I'm not going to second guess it. What they seem to be saying that they intend is very difficult. It's almost like a contradiction in terms. To go in, to root out the Hamas leadership, to get the fighters, to get the bunkers, to get the arsenals, and to get the hostages released.
Yeah.
I just don't see how they're going to do it. There's a pile of rubble. Rubble makes brilliant defences, by the way, and you have fighters mixed with what you might call civilians. And how does the average Israeli soldier
distinguish between the two?
And he's a citizen.
Yeah.
She's a citizen.
And this contradiction of this huge aerial assault, as you say, the rubble, with them being told they're all in the tunnels. There is a subterranean Gaza where they operate. So therefore, what is the military reasoning behind flattening the buildings?
Yes, well, are they going to go... Remember, the Americans got into a bit of difficulty with this in '91 in Baghdad, where they had bunker-penetrating bombs, and they kept on saying they were military targets. And they knocked out 300 refugees in one raid. It's very, very difficult to discern the human content. Fighting in streets is very difficult, even for the most professional armies. Look how the British Army struggled in the early days when things got hot in Belfast and Derry, both those in the early 1970s. The French know it, and they've known it brutally through experiences in Algeria, which made a brilliant film, by the way, the Battle of Algiers. And the Brits and the French trained together with their elite units intensively for this. If you're going to try and actually will have to require a certain amount of swarm tactics. In other words, you will be putting in, I think, tens of thousands of Israeli troops of various degrees of skill and training. The elite, very good at the front. But the way you do it, as the experience even of the British mandate there was, you cordon and search. You have to draw a cordon round and you have to go in and search in the rubble with lots of people, probably quite a few corpses, I'm afraid to say. How are you going to find them? It's going to, do they know where the hostages are? By the way, this, as we got a hint with Lloyd Austin and Tony Blinken, is that it's quite clear why we're there, why the Americans are there. Everybody was saying, isn't it absurd, the Brits sending 2 Navy ships, support helicopters and Marines with surveillance equipment. We do have an interest. We have British citizens there. And this is a principle that's been established, particularly by the Canadians, curiously, where the life of your citizen, an innocent British citizen, is at stake, there is a British interest.
Robert, since last weekend's terrorist atrocities, we hear Israel say repeatedly that they want to crush Hamas. Is that possible? And is not a political solution also needed, not just a military one here?
The politics has failed, and it has failed from the beginning of Hamas in 1987. But the politics is where it lies. And that answers your first question. I'm sorry to make it like a puzzle, because a lot of the power, the real long-distance runner power of Hamas is not with these rather crazy and, as we found, psychopathic and crazed fighters of the kind that went into the settlements and the kibbutz to the east of Gaza.
Yeah.
But it's where you have the money, a lot of the brains, and a lot of the access to the weaponry. And it's the Gulf. That opens the gates. You get a lot of supply from Hezbollah. Yes, there's been a lot of basic training of the guys and people on the ground, and it is a very sexist society, so it's mostly blokes. But a lot of the stuff from Iran comes through that route. So I think that some brain somewhere, I fear, is planning a game of retreat, a last stand, but it won't be over for Hamas, alas.
And very quickly, is that Tehran, as we heard from Jovan Galant, Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, one axis of evil, or are they operating on a different, separate basis?
I think that's a very particular point of view. Now, I'm trying to be very careful because I don't want to stare things. The Israelis have been obsessed with destroying Tehran and Iran for a long, long time. They've feared they're going to get nuclear weapons and so on. But militancy just doesn't come from the sheer access. And this is the thing that's so weird, and I've been trying to explain it. Actually, the roots of I've given it away, of Hamas are largely with Sunni mosques and sects, Sheikh Yassin, the founder,
and Sunni Muslims, yeah.
And so they're bedfellows, but they're not quite aligned in this way, and there's a lot of Sunni militancy.
OK. Interesting topic, which we'll explore in the next hour. You'll be with us to analyse all the latest developments coming up. Thank you very much.
A number of schools in London are closed today because of safety fears over this ongoing war in Israel. And ministers have announced a £3 million package for a charity that helps protect Jewish community sites.
And, of course, the Met reflecting that there have been a record number of anti-Semitic incidents recorded since the events in Gaza and in southern Israel. Well, Lisa Hartle's been speaking to one community in North London about their experiences. She's there for us in Golders Green. And, of course, it seems to be a daily occurrence now in terms of people's direct personal experience.
Yeah, so Golders Green has a large Jewish community, and today, as well as over the week, I've been speaking to other members of the Jewish community in London, and they've all said the same thing, that they are heartbroken over the conflict, but they're also worried about the repercussions what that could mean for them. And as we heard yesterday, the government has pledged £3 million to the organisation CST, Community Security Trust. They provide security for Jewish schools, synagogues and other Jewish community buildings. And they've said that just this week alone, they've seen a rise of 324% in reports of anti-Semitism. We've heard reports of at least 3 schools in North London closing today. That's amidst heightened security concerns after the former leader of Hamas called for protests around the world, although that security company has tried to reassure people on X, formerly known as Twitter, by saying that they've received numerous messages about this, but it's mainly directed at Muslims in Arab countries and does not include a call to violence against Jewish people in Britain. But everybody I've spoken to, especially here today, they've all said how concerned they are and how unsafe they feel. I think we can hear from just a few of those people now.
Well, I suppose like most other people, very concerned, and obviously we have to be wary of where we go, where we are, and be vigilant, and obviously much more than usual.
Very threatened, very worried. I've just taken my son to school. He's in Hasmonean, and he asked me to pick him up because he's worried, he's scared. And he's a 15-year-old. You know, this should not be happening here in England.
So obviously it's a concerning time. We're trying to live lives as normal as possible. I want to start off, I think everyone's got a legitimate right to protest and to campaign for what they feel is right.
Earlier on this week, I spoke to the CEO, Mark Gardner, of that CST, that security organisation, and he said that if a non-Jewish person went into a Jewish school, they would be shocked at the level of security they already have in place. That he went into detail about how schools are built away from roads to avoid car bombs, and there's loads of different measures in place. But on top of that, they are putting extra security in and heightening police presence around Jewish schools.
Lisa, thank you very much indeed for updating us there at Golders Green in North London. Thank you.
There are reverberations around the globe with what is happening at the moment. This is the capital of Yemen, Sana'a, where you can see thousands upon thousands of people gathering for pro-Palestinian protests. These people, these crowds, they believe that Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza as they tell thousands of people there to flee and head south before that expected massive ground offensive.
You can see the Palestinian flags here, in particular in the centre of Sana'a, outside the UNICEF building, no less, where they've been declaring their support for the Palestinian cause, but also Yemen's Houthi leader, Abdel Malik al-Houthi, saying that if the US intervenes in the Gaza conflict directly, the group will respond by firing drones and missiles and take other military options, he said. There are red lines when it comes to Gaza, adding that Houthis were ready to coordinate with other groups to intervene. But at the moment, we should reflect these protests largely peaceful, despite large numbers there. We'll update you with the reaction across the globe. And as we say, Robert Fox with us for the next hour to analyse all the latest developments. Stay with us on the live desk.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good afternoon, it is 2 o'clock. This is the live desk here on GB News. Coming up this Friday lunchtime.
US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin saying there's no time for neutrality or excuses or equivalence, meeting his Israeli counterpart in Tel Aviv, pledging more aid if needed as Israel drops thousands of leaflets on Gaza, warning more than 1 million they must move south for their own safety.
It comes as thousands of civilians flee Gaza City in desperation, with a ground offensive expected imminently.
Here in Britain, fears of a backlash. 3 Jewish schools in North London shut, with fears of growing anti-Semitic violence. One head teacher warning parents to keep their children indoors.
And these are the live pictures we are getting from Yemen, the capital Sana'a, as crowds of people, thousands of them, gather for pro-Palestinian protests.
Indications, they say, from the Houthi grouping that they will take action against the United States if it intervenes directly in Gaza. But we do have to say the protests in Sana'a at the moment peaceful, although there are thousands there with the Palestinian flags and voicing their support for the Palestinian cause. We'll have the latest from there and, of course, from Israel itself. But first, latest headlines coming up with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 1 minute past 2. Ursula von der Leyen has arrived in Tel Aviv amid the ongoing conflict following Hamas's attack on Israel. The President of the European Commission has announced on social media her solidarity with the Israeli people. Meanwhile, the US Secretary of Defense says Washington's support for Israel is ironclad. In a joint press conference with his Israeli counterpart, Lloyd Austin said the Gaza war is for Israel's future and that Hamas is part of an axis of evil with Iran. Israel has been dropping leaflets in Gaza warning residents to move for their own safety and to distance themselves from Hamas terrorists who they say are using civilians as human shields. 1.1 million residents have been told to move to the south within 24 hours for their own safety. The United Nations says such a move is impossible without devastating humanitarian consequences. Meanwhile, the First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, has posted a video on social media from his mother-in-law, a retired nurse who's in Gaza.
Everybody from Gaza is moving towards where we are.
1 million people, no food, no water, and still they're bombing them as they leave. Where are we going to put them? But my thought is, all these people in the hospital cannot be evacuated. Where's humanity? Where's people's hearts in the world to let this happen in this day and age? And may God help us.
The Israel Defence Forces continue to amass tanks and soldiers near the Gaza Strip border, with a ground invasion looking increasingly likely. Tension is also building on Israel's northern border with Lebanon. IDF troops are on alert after the Hezbollah terror group said it would ignore calls for it to stay out of the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Some North London Jewish schools are closed today over concerns for the children's safety amid the Israel-Hamas war. It's reported that 3 Jewish schools in North London told parents they would not reopen until Monday. Meanwhile, the government has announced an additional £3 million of funding to go towards providing extra security for the UK's Jewish population. It comes as the Jewish security charity CST recorded a 400% increase in anti-Semitic incidents since the outbreak of the conflict. A teacher has been killed and 2 others injured in a knife attack in France. The attack happened at a high school in the city of Arras in the north of the country. Local media reported the attacker shouting Allahu Akbar, although that's not been independently verified. A suspect has been arrested and France's anti-terrorism office say they're now investigating. The EU is investigating the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, after disinformation was spread in the wake of the Hamas terror attacks. In a letter sent to the platform's owner, Elon Musk, the European Commission said there were indications that X is being used to disseminate illegal content, despite being flagged by authorities. Elon Musk says the Commission should list its examples publicly, even after various media reports of questionable content. The investigation is the first under the EU's new tech rules on harmful content. The Prime Minister is in Sweden today, meeting with Northern European allies. Leaders were expected to focus on the threat from Russia, but the gathering has been overshadowed by the conflict in Israel and Gaza. Rishi Sunak reminded the summit they're the first line of defence across much of the region. In other news, Nigel Farage has been rebanked for personal and business accounts. Lloyds has accepted the GB News presenter after 10 other banks rejected him. Nigel Farage was involved in a public row with NatWest in July after the group closed his bank accounts, apparently due to his political views. He says he's pleased to see one high street lender isn't politically prejudiced. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's over to Mark and Pip.
Welcome back to the live desk. Let's update you on, well, a fluid and changing situation in terms of Gaza, with Israel having warned earlier 1.1 million civilians to leave the north of the Gaza Strip within 24 hours, with these leaflets being dropped onto Gaza City to tell the civilians to evacuate immediately.
They've been told that for their own safety, they should head south of the Wadi Gaza. Israel has been massing troops and armour on the border ahead of an imminent ground offensive. These are the latest pictures of civilians fleeing Gaza City, frantically sitting on cars, just having a few minutes to grab things together, putting their families, as you can see, into the boots of cars, some going on foot, leaving their homes, not knowing when they'll be able to return. Well, charities on the ground say that Israel's evacuation request is impossible, while the UN says mass relocation cannot be done without devastating consequences.
Let's get the latest with our reporter Charlie Peters, who's updating us in Tel Aviv. And Charlie, we did have this indication from a US State Department official that Antony Blinken had spoken to Benjamin Netanyahu about trying to establish safe areas in Gaza. No details emerging on that, but clearly it is something that they've had to reflect on, and an indication they would have to get the Red Cross and indeed the United Nations involved in that process.
Yes, that's right. It's clearly a tricky diplomatic situation to secure as much humanitarian support in Gaza and for Gazans heading south away from that likely incoming bombardment from the Israeli Air Force. And the scenes that we're seeing of so many civilians fleeing come hours after Hamas said that people there should reject the IDF message and that this was official propaganda stirred up by the Israelis. But it seems that the civilians are clearly reacting to that message as anticipated and heading south urgently. Possibly 1.1 million people now could be moving or have been called to move by that IDF liaison message with the United Nations. And what will happen to them next? I mean, below the Wadi Gaza, there are some open areas. There are some spaces that are built up as well. But there certainly isn't space for 1.1 million people in what is already one of the most densely populated parts of the world. Establishing that safe crossing with Egypt in the Sinai Peninsula and accessing the Rafah crossing for aid to come through there will almost certainly be an option on the table as they try and secure more aid for people in that area. But of course, a scene of grave concern as bombs head south and people flee as urgently as they possibly can.
And just to underline this flurry of diplomatic activity that is taking place, we are getting word that the Vatican has offered to mediate between Israel and Hamas militants to free Israeli hostages. Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, he is now in Qatar. Is it Qatar that could hold the key to getting these hostages out?
Well, Qatar is, of course, an area where many Palestinian leaders, not necessarily linked to Hamas, but it is an area where political leaders in Palestine, in the West Bank, are regularly placed and based and host meetings. I think we'll also see significant involvement from Jordan, of course, the King of Jordan holding discussions with partners in the region and holding also a significant role over the security and position in Jerusalem. But of course, the most significant factor here in securing the humanitarian situation in Gaza will be what the Israelis choose to do, because their number one priority is destroying the Hamas military capability, as they describe it. And I don't think much is going to stop them from carrying that mission out. And so this urge to move civilians south will almost certainly be followed by a heavier bombardment than the already severe ones that we have seen in the last few days. 750 targets hit last night, and that is going to continue tonight as well.
But just update us, Charlie, on the thinking of ordinary Israelis there about the fate of the hostages and what may happen with that ground incursion. It's interesting that, for obvious reasons, Yoav Gallant was not going to talk about any details in terms of what might be prepared, but clearly the fear is that they could be literally in the firing line.
Yes, that's right. And people here are also doing what they can to try and help locate where those hostages are. Many of the people who are missing, of course, they're not sure if they've been taken hostage or not. So tech specialists in Tel Aviv have gathered in a volunteer location in the center of the city to try and use AI and social media to locate any photos of people taken in footage uploaded by the IDF and also by Hamas terrorists since the invasion on Saturday. And what happens to those hostages when people head south? I mean, Hamas are urging people not to go. Do the hostages stay with them? How many are in the north of the Gaza Strip? These are questions that I think the IDF will be asking very seriously. And many civilians here extremely nervous about what happens to members of their friends and family in that strip.
And just to explain to people where you are, has been a restaurant in previous days and weeks, and it's been this sort of centre to collect food supplies and meals and other things for the various Israeli Defence Force volunteers who are going literally to the front fairly shortly.
We're back in a different location now where we're expected to speak to some survivors who have been rescued from southern Israel and have come up to Tel Aviv, to the relative safety of Tel Aviv, to seek support and to recuperate. But yes, earlier today we were at a restaurant in central Tel Aviv, which overnight became a kitchen for feeding the military. The army is struggling desperately to sustain its forces across the country, sending hundreds of thousands of reservists to the north to shore up that border with southern Lebanon, but also trying to sustain supplies to that massive convoy on the south for that likely ground invasion of the Gaza Strip. And so they're sending out 30,000 meals a day, working day and night in shifts in order to make sure people get fed.
Charlie, in Tel Aviv for the moment, thank you for that. Back to you, of course, throughout the afternoon.
Here in the studio, we are joined by Foreign Affairs Specialist James Marlowe, and Robert Fox is still with us, Defence Editor at the Evening Standard. James, can I just start with you first of all? In terms of this, what we believe is an imminent ground invasion, how well equipped, how well prepared do you think Israeli soldiers are? We see hundreds of thousands of them now massing at the border. Are they ready for this?
Well, firstly, I can tell you that I was just in Israel. I just got back. I tried to get out there again Tuesday. The flight was delayed, then it was postponed, then it was cancelled. And although there are still some flights bringing back soldiers there, I also caught a briefing this morning by the IDF. As Charlie has just said, it was 700 targets hit overnight, perhaps the same. And they mentioned specifically, and this is going to partly answer your question, if I may, they mentioned that they were specifically going after, and I'm looking down to get their wording exactly correct, infrastructure inside the buildings. This is, of course, Hamas infrastructure, underground tunnels, command centres, military posts, homes of the terrorists and terror operatives. That's where this 750. Now, the bombing was mostly done in the north, within Gaza City, but in the north of Gaza City. The problem that the IDF have is that they have been monitoring this for several years. They have underground tunnels going everywhere, and specifically, they are trying to get these tunnels, but they are so well sophisticated, they're literally underground bunkers. And there is at least 2 tunnels going all the way from Gaza City to the south to Han Yunis. Now, that's exactly where the fighters are going to be, and they are right now. In other words, the Hamas terrorists and their brothers, Islamic Jihad and the various other groups. The problem is that Israel wants to take out some of these tunnels because Hamas is saying, we're welcoming you, come in, whenever you're ready, come to us. They're leaving their civilians, their families, their friends on top. They're underneath because they're booby-trapping a number of the buildings. And as Israel went in a few years ago, unfortunately, they lost a number of soldiers.
And those hostages could be underground?
Well, very likely. There was a report this morning, as you know, from Hamas to say that some of the hostages had been killed by the bombing. You cannot verify anything that Palestinian Hamas really say. The fact is that there's about 130 hostages, men, women and children and babies. We know for sure that they were definitely, because we saw women being taken away with babies. There's enough photographic evidence for this. By the way, they took it. It wasn't done by satellites or some of the cameras. And I just had to turn my phone over because in the last 10 or 15 minutes, I mean, I'm getting so many notifications. Firstly, my friend's daughter's boyfriend of 3 years, he's just, well, actually, he was buried about an hour ago. My other friend here in London, his son, who heard about this on Saturday morning, went down there as a security person and he was shot in the head. He's now lying in a coma. Right now in Israel, that they have a dedicated channel for all of those names. And I think the last I heard was 200, and I haven't got it written down here, many names of the soldiers, 200 and something soldiers, which have officially been named. We've got, of course, the hostages, which come from various different countries, not just
So just to pick up, that's 200 soldiers that have been injured already?
No, dead.
Dead,
no,
right,
we're talking about, I think it was 298
And this is
soldiers.
Before any ground offensive actually starts?
Well, you have to remember that the rockets are coming through. In the last hour, there's
well,
been a
indeed,
big
we're
bombardment.
seeing more smoke rising there on the Skynet. Robert, let's just bring you in and to touch on what James was indicating there. They've had experience of this 2008, 2014, 166 troops died in 2014. They had to literally go in with close arms, with knives to clear the tunnels. This is old-fashioned street fighting and the tunnel fighting we saw, in Vietnam.
This is the problem, and I think, as James very rightly has suggested, is that I was just thinking, you know, a lot of the wars that I've covered, the Iraqs and so on, we got actually carried away by highly sophisticated, even autonomous weapons. That you can
technology
see
and radar screens and so on.
And funny enough, I've even had arguments with British commanders experienced in the SAS. And I said, what are you going to do about the final 100 yards, the close battle, close combat, which is proving so brutal, by the way, in Ukraine. This is where I do take James' point. I think, though, we have to be very careful with generics and generalizations. Oh, there's going to be a ground offensive. Well, really, what will it look like? What they'll be doing now, and keeping well out of sight, as any professional military force will do, they'll be doing rock drills, as they're called, going through different terrains and scenarios, really training their commandos to go through the kind of stuff and to deal with precisely the kind of, it's a moral dilemma and it's a tactical dilemma. How do you deal with what's left behind in the rubble? Corpses, innocent civilians, hostages, anti-tank people, and people, as James was suggesting, if I say, people who are well prepared for this. I mean, there is a brutal aspect to the tactical playbook.
Is there any alternative? Because, you know, it's interesting that there have been these experts saying, look, this is Hamas laying a trap to draw the Israelis in. They knew what the response would be. Is there any military alternative to actually going in?
Now, can I go a bit upstream on what you've just said, Mark? I think that this is the thing with any battle that one has been in. The battle rhythm cannot be predicted beforehand. They are all completely different. And I think that, you know, there are people, that's why I think it's very wise, obvious for the consensus of the nation, that they brought people like Gantz, Eisenkot, very experienced. They've commanded the army.
In terms of this new war cabinet.
They have faced this as a daily dilemma, and they will be working out. The thing that I really would like to restrain from committing the ultimate sin of hypocrisy myself, there's too much advice from outside, because these people are deeply, deeply experienced at it. And whatever we're thinking, I'm sure the Israeli command is thinking.
Yeah, and we had, for obvious reasons, Yoav Gallant, the defence minister, said, I'm not going to talk in detail about anything. I mean, is it the case that they are assessing minute by minute before they make any move, that there is no grand master plan as such?
Oh, there's definitely a grand master plan, I'm sure of that.
Yeah, that's the way you plan.
I'm sorry?
That's the way you plan. You've got to have a scheme of operations. Sorry, there will be a big thing, sorry.
And I heard from one of the senior cabinet ministers just a couple of days ago is that there is so much, and rightly so, there is so much anger in the country. I mean, if you look at America, America has been hit twice within our lifetimes, almost within our lifetimes. 9/11, of course, and the Pearl Harbor. Now, if you put both of those attacks together, it doesn't come anywhere near what happened in Israel last Saturday morning. At least 1,200 to 1,300 innocent civilians and babies. And what we saw is that the raping, that the burning of the bodies, it's just, I've seen so much video. And what the Palestinian Hamas has done, that the country, as you know, politically was very split beforehand, just like in the United States, like Britain was before Brexit and like Scotland was before their referendum.
That's the reason I'm asking about this master plan and whether that's being rewritten, because clearly they were caught so unawares by what happened. The intelligence failed, the surveillance failed, even the reaction in terms of getting the troops down south quickly enough failed. So will there be an awful lot of rethinking going on?
Well, no one can deny that. It's clear. And it's exactly what happened in the 1973 war, where
Yom Kippur,
they were kept sleeping. They were caught sleeping, rather. But after 1 week, in fact, less than a week, Israel managed to get the upper hand. And that's exactly what I was told a couple of days ago, that Israel will get the upper hand over this because it needs to send back that deterrent.
Right.
For many, many years, Israel's gone through many wars. Israel had a deterrent. It had a deterrent, obviously, in the 48 war, the 56, 60, 73. The Entebbe. We're probably old enough to remember the 1976 Entebbe raid into Uganda.
In which Netanyahu's brother was involved, I think.
Yonatan, yes, Yoni, he was killed.
Yeah.
He was commanding that particular unit. Now, since that time, since Israel gave, I know this is going to offend a lot of people, but there was the Oslo Accords in 1993. It was signed in 1994. The first part of the Oslo was handing over Gaza to the Palestinians and Jericho. And it was for the Palestinians to run their own affairs and see how you get on. And I can tell you that there were so many Arab Gulf rich Arabs who are willing to invest so much money. And they started to do that with hotels and shopping malls.
Qatar directly involved in more recent times in this?
We brought up Qatar with Charlie. I think you, Mark, mentioned it. I have to tell you that Qatar has been closely connected with Palestinian Hamas. In fact, the former head of
is
Hamas
living in a flat there at the moment.
Ismail Haniyeh is actually hosting.
I just want to interrupt you, James, to bring our viewers and listeners this latest death toll involving Palestinians in Gaza. Now, 1,799 Palestinians are dead. That's come from the Gaza Health Ministry. 6,388 wounded. Robert, if we can just talk about this growing humanitarian crisis. We are seeing the pictures of families frantically fleeing, believing they have, well, at the moment, as it stands, a matter of hours to get out, to head south. Where are they going to go? Is Egypt going to show some sign of welcoming them through, opening up the border, the Rafah crossing there?
It's problematic. And I say I have to be very careful here. Egypt is very leery, very worried about that. It's been very, very restrictive. It's been very worried consistently over what has come backwards and forwards through the tunnels and through the crossings. There's a commercial crossing to the east, and then there's the Rafah crossing. They will not want a mass flow because they're in such trouble anyway. And
what
one
about
of the
letting through women and children and babies?
But that's where their security forces will be under pressure and they will want help from the UN. And this is the problem. When you're moving so many people around like this, probably 1 3/4 or 1.5 million going to Khan Yunis, moving to the south, really, as UNRWA has said, and it's not only the Red Cross, I'm surprised they're talking about the Red Cross, it's really the Red Crescent that would be acceptable at all to the municipal authorities. They are desperately stretched. They don't have the means to do this, to look after them.
Just going to interrupt you, gentlemen, just to update you, and thank you for all your thoughts. We are expecting a news conference from Qatar with the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and senior officials with the Qatari Prime Minister and Foreign Minister. That just coming through from Reuters. So clearly when we get any view of that, we'll bring it to you live.
Do stay with us here on the live desk on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it. Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the live desk. We've got plenty happening, which we're trying to keep you on top of. Just to reiterate, we are expecting a news conference later this afternoon with Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, who's in Qatar with the Qatari Prime Minister and Defence Secretary. We'll have that live for you, hopefully, when it happens. But, of course, much more political fallout with Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister in Sweden. And let's get more with Olivia Utley, our political correspondent, joining us. Because, Olivia, the language being used where we had this news conference with the US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin saying resolve, not revenge, purpose, not panic, and a similar sort of a reassessment, if you like, from Rishi Sunak about caution being the watchword here.
Well, absolutely. I think there's a marked change in tone from European leaders and from the US as well. Whereas before we have seen very, very stringent support for Israel, that support is still absolutely there. But in with it, there is this note of caution. Rishi Sunak said today that Gazans, ordinary Palestinians, are sort of part of Hamas, enmeshed was the word he used, in ordinary Palestinian society. And Sadiq Khan has actually warned Israel that they must be proportionate. He is worried about a disproportionate response from Israel. Emmanuel Macron has said that terrorists must be treated, must be punished, but they must be treated, but there must be justice found. And Antony Blinken has said something similar too. We are all expecting now some sort of ground attack in Gaza. Israel has already warned Palestinians to get out. Hamas has told Palestinians to stay put, and world leaders are just watching and waiting in anticipation and fear to see what happens, because there is real fear now of serious escalation and the tensions just getting further and further out of control.
And Rishi Sunak is in Sweden for a summit of Northern European nations. They had been due to discuss Ukraine, hadn't they? But, of course, that's been very much overshadowed by these minute-by-minute events, really.
Well, absolutely. We were expecting this this joint expeditionary force, the 10 Northern European leaders who are gathering today in Sweden. We were very much expecting them to talk about Ukraine. Countries such as Denmark and Estonia have obviously been, their minds have been sharpened to the threat from Russia since the invasion of Ukraine. And we're expecting this summit to be focused mainly on energy security, on the new Green Industrial Pact between Norway and the UK. But of course, as you say, Pip, events in the Middle East have absolutely overshadowed. The line that we got out of the bilateral meetings between the UK and Denmark and the UK and Sweden this morning were that all these countries stand very firmly behind Israel. But as I say, there is that little note of caution creeping in. Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak have both just made sure to make clear to Israel that they must try and allow as many Palestinians as possible to escape. And then we've also heard from the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Alicia Kearns. Now, she's a backbencher, so what she says is not representative of what the government believes, but she is a senior Conservative, and she's said that the Israeli government is obliged under humanitarian law to turn back on the electricity and water supplies to Gaza. So she's gone a little bit further than either of the two leaders of the party. But her words actually chime very closely with what Sadiq Khan has said about worries about a disproportionate response. So we are seeing this little note of caution creeping in today.
Olivia, thank you for that. You're seeing the pictures here live, the skyscape, the buildings of Gaza. Smoke still rising there, and that picture on your right will be updating you as people do seem to be moving further south in the Gaza Strip. We'll be speaking to the Israeli Defense Force shortly to get the latest and update you on the situation. But first, the headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. Here are the headlines at 2:32. The President of the European Commission has arrived in Tel Aviv as the conflict between Israel and Hamas terrorists threatens to escalate. Ursula von der Leyen offered her solidarity with the Israeli people. Meanwhile, the US Secretary of Defense says Washington's support is ironclad. In a joint press conference with his Israeli counterpart, Lloyd Austin said the Gaza war is for Israel's future and that Hamas is part of an axis of evil with Iran. Israel is amassing tanks and soldiers near the Gaza Strip border, with a ground invasion looking increasingly likely. Tension is also building on the northern border with Lebanon. IDF troops are on alert there after the Hezbollah terror group said it would ignore calls for it to stay out of the conflict with Hamas. Meanwhile, in France, a teacher has been killed and 2 others injured in a knife attack at a high school in the northern city of Arras. Local authorities are urging people to avoid the town centre. A suspect has been arrested, and France's anti-terrorism office say they're now investigating. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak met with Northern European allies in Sweden today. Leaders at the summit were expected to focus on the threat from Russia, but the gathering's been overshadowed by the conflict in Israel and Gaza. And in other news, Nigel Farage has been rebanked for his personal and business accounts. Lloyds accepted the GB News presenter after 10 other banks rejected him. Nigel Farage was involved in a public row with NatWest in July after the group closed his bank accounts, apparently due to his political views. He says he's pleased to see one high street lender isn't politically prejudiced. Well, those are the top stories, and you can, of course, get more on all of them by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2191 and €1.1568. The price of gold is £1,568.67 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,634 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back to the live desk. Let's update you with the latest pictures, these live feeds that we're getting from both Gaza and then further south in Israel, Ashkelon there, where you can still see the smoke rising. There have been reports still of rocket fire from Gaza hitting the south, but also significantly being fired from Gaza towards northern Israel, which is a further complication. Robert Fox, defence editor at the Evening Standard, still with us. Robert, this is another interesting aspect of this, that they've still got the capability to fire these missiles. They've still got this stockpile, it seems.
They've got a stockpile of, it seemed, about 4 different categories, including the bog standard, if you could put it like that, the Katyusha, Uncle Joe Stalin's organ. It comes from, it's basically a Second World War II, but updated, but it's standard guerrilla army fare. And things like the Grad 21s that have been used in Ukraine by both sides, and they've still got it. There seems to be something rather strange about the way the Hamas is operating. It's not operating entirely as a guerrilla army, entirely as a terrorist group, although that's a thing that I think nobody's been able to account for, is the psychopathic behaviour of those young men in those settlements, and when they went in and attacked civilians and didn't know, they had no, it's as if, well, it was, they'd left civilization totally. Now, were they prepared for that? Were they on drugs? Had they been pumped up? Had they been brainwashed? Very interesting. But the other thing is this hardcore military aspect of getting the stuff in, building it, training it, and with a totally unscrupulous leadership. The unscrupulous leadership wants to fight Israel and thinks it can destroy Israel.
And is this,
come what may to the Palestinian people.
Is this the military wing of Hamas, Al-Quds Brigade? So it's a different mindset for those at the top.
Yes. And then you get the whole political aspect. But the trouble is, as was warned, when they had election, 2006, 2007, Hamas came to power, they grabbed power, they took it, and we're never going to give it up again. It is a military dictatorship. And this, by the way, if I can add, is the problem with Egypt. Hamas is related to the Muslim Brotherhood. Do you remember after Mubarak went briefly under Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood took over and tried to do the same thing all over again. And Egypt is going to be very wary of this.
OK. As we're speaking, Robert, I think we can now bring in Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner from the Israeli Defence Forces, who can join us once more to update us. We spoke to him yesterday. Thank you very much indeed for your time again. I was just saying, we were just seeing some shots there, the skyline and Ashkelon with some smoke rising. It does seem that there are still rockets being fired from Gaza, despite your efforts to take them out.
Yes, of course. The working assumption is that Hamas will have these capabilities until we remove them from power and destroy all of their operational capabilities. We understand that the way their forces disperse throughout the Gaza Strip, they're very loosely connected, so different squads can conduct these types of rocket launches against us. And so we are utilizing our missile defense systems, the Iron Dome and other capabilities in order to intercept those when they are being launched at Israeli populations. I don't know if you're aware, the Iron Dome interceptor only operates if the missile and rocket is actually headed to populated areas. We only intercept when there is a case of an imminent threat, and that's an important point to point out.
Could you bring us up to date with the latest situation regarding the Israeli hostages? Hamas earlier claimed that 13 have died in Israeli airstrikes. Can you give us any information about their situation?
Every time somebody asks me about Hamas says, I find it very laughable that anybody can believe a word that they are saying. Everything they are saying today is propaganda. We need to be very, very cautious about everything that they report to the world, and we have to really take that into consideration. I'm not aware of any reports, any update on the issue of the hostages. They are at the top of our priorities. We expect them to be returned home. We expect Hamas to take responsibility and care for their well-being, and we will deal with Hamas and hold them accountable for what they have done to these people.
I don't know if you're aware that we had this update from US Secretary of State Antony Blinken that there'll be a news conference later with the Qatari Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad and indications perhaps that there may be something said, otherwise they wouldn't hold a news conference. I know that diplomacy is not your area of expertise as such, but is there any hope that there could still be some kind of diplomatic breakthrough? And what would Israel need to stay your hand?
Well, obviously, I speak on behalf of the military, and our focus actually is on the military operation in destroying and degrading Hamas's operational capability. Let's leave the politics for the politicians and the diplomacy for the diplomats.
OK, so does that mean that you are still preparing until you get word from your political masters, stop, that military machine carries on preparing?
Of course, we are in full swing. As to say, we've recruited some 300,000 reservists. I'm one of those. And indeed, we have deployed forces across our frontier on the Gaza Strip, staging grounds, different types of forces. And of course, we're reinforcing different locations in the north along the front with Hezbollah in the border with Lebanon. We're taking the situation very, very seriously, but we need to be prepared for any scenario and every development. So that's basically where we are now. And if we look 24 hours ahead, I think that's where we're safe to say we will continue to strike. The most important thing that we've done today, we announced and we instructed the people of Gaza to vacate the north of the Gaza Strip, to vacate Gaza City and head south, because we are ramping up our offensive against Hamas. This terrorist organization can never, ever be allowed to strike and slaughter Israelis again.
And obviously you're aware of the UN saying that this 24-hour deadline, it's impossible for 1 million plus people to get out and leave their homes and find safety. Is that a fixed deadline? Would you allow it to be extended?
So I'm happy to report that we've seen lots of coverage of people actually moving south. I think, you're just showing it as we speak. So I think what's more important is not people saying it's impossible, but people actually listening to our instructions, people that that our life is dear to them need to listen. People that are not terrorists, people that are not connected to Hamas, they need to listen to our instructions. They will save lives. So you need to shift. They need to move down south as soon as possible. Regarding the time frame, we have our capabilities to watch and assess the situation. The people of Gaza are not our enemy. Hamas is our enemy. That is what we are striking at.
Just a quick thought then, Lieutenant Colonel Lerner, and I know you can't talk about operational details, but people may be confused as to why the airstrikes have been carrying on and destroying buildings when we also keep hearing it is about a subterranean world, about tunnels, about Hamas having stockpiles in these various bunkers and so on. How does the destruction of the building lead to an easier assault on a subterranean complex?
So it's not only subterranean. Hamas has utilized and abused the entire urban area to establish its command and control centers. And we destroyed drones that would be utilized as suicide drones with explosives on. They positioned them on the rooftops of houses. So they don't care who's in the house. They will utilize whatever they can in the civilian arena in order to conduct their atrocities. So when we take out the rocket that is being hidden in the garden, or when we take out the drones that have been hidden on the roof, there is destruction there. When the command and control center or a place where a terrorist is hiding out is in above ground, then that's a target. So of course, what we're seeing here is our pursuit against Hamas and their terrorists, that they cannot be permitted to govern the Gaza Strip. They haven't proven anything. They failed the people of Gaza miserably. And our job is to restore safety and security to the people of Israel. And removing them will permit that.
Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner from the IDF, thank you very much indeed for updating us. Thanks for your time once again.
Well, we are now joined by author and a research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, Miha Goodman. Thanks very much for talking to us this afternoon. You were just probably hearing us talk to Peter Lerner of the Israeli Defence Forces. How do you feel towards the IDF today after the atrocities of the weekend and the hours we know it did take the military to arrive to help?
There was a moment for 12 hours roughly in the area that's between Sderot and Nahal Oz and Kfar Aza, where the state of Israel wasn't there. It wasn't functioning. This is something that us Israelis love to think about, investigate, right after the war. That's something we'll have to do. But now the state of Israel is back. Sovereignty is restored. And now us Israelis, we had a perspective. We know how it looks like when the state of Israel is not there. It was like for 1,900 years, Jews didn't have a state. And then for 12 hours on the 7th of October, again, our state wasn't there. We got a glimpse of what it looks like when Jews don't have powers to protect themselves, when Jews don't have sovereignty, when Jews don't have a state. And you know how it looks like? It looks like Be'eri, like Nahal Oz, like Kfar Aza. I'll say it bluntly. It looks like Auschwitz. The world has to understand that we got a glimpse of what it looks like when Jews don't have a state, and now it's clear. The alternative to a Jewish state is Auschwitz. We choose life over death. We choose Jewish sovereignty over Auschwitz. That is a tremendous, powerful awakening that my Israeli brothers and sisters are going through this past week.
Miha, therefore, I wonder what you make of Lloyd Austin's words, the US Defense Secretary that was there a few hours ago, saying resolve, not revenge, purpose, not panic. And indeed, other analysts, such as Sir Alex Younger, former head of Secret Intelligence Service here, to avoid falling into a trap that Hamas may well have set for you, knowing what the Israeli reaction would be.
I have advice to our enemies in Iran. What you saw the 7th of October was not an image of the Israeli army. That was a moment where the Israeli army, for some reason, was not functioning. I promise you, our army is back. Our military is back. Our army is highly functioning. Our army calls reservists to show up. They thought 70% will show up. 140% showed up. The Israeli spirit is strong. The Israeli spirit is united, and we have many reasons to believe that I don't know exactly what the surprise move Israel is going to make. If it's a ground entry to Gaza, I don't know what it's going to be.
Right. And obviously they're not going to talk about those operational details, but I wonder if you think because there has been a political change that you now have effectively, I guess what you would call a unity government or a new war cabinet, that the approach may well be different now.
I think, you see, Israelis are united, and the people of Israel were united before the government was united. Usually leaders unite the people. In Israel, it's upside down. The people united its leaders. We got together after 8 months of not really liking each other, protests. We got together, we united. The leadership followed us and not vice versa. And now that we're united, we are willing to go to this war and to fight and to win and to defeat Hamas and to destroy terrorism. And we're not going to come back until this mission is done. But I want to now, regarding what Austin said and regarding Israel will never target civilians. Will never intentionally try to target civilians. And here's something, there's something very important to understand. Hamas makes not one, but two violations, two sins against morality and humanity. One sin is the way it attacks. The second sin is the way it defends itself. It attacks civilians, that's sin number one. It protects itself because it hides amongst civilians. That is sin number two. Now, the people of Gaza, many civilians in Gaza, I think, sadly, are going to die. They're going to die because Hamas used them as human defense shields. As we are talking, the Israeli Defense Forces are asking the residents of Gaza to leave Gaza because they might be hurt. And you know who's asking them to stay in Gaza? Hamas themselves. So Hamas are risking their own civilians. Civilians will die. They might die by Israeli bullets, but Hamas are the people who are murdering them. So Hamas have murdered many Israelis in the 7th of October, and now Hamas will be in charge of murdering many Palestinians in the days and weeks to come.
So you accept, Miha, that many civilians, innocent civilians, are going to die. Is therefore not part of the solution here a political one, not just a military one? Because crushing Hamas completely, that's a big ask.
So I have two things. One, I really hope civilians won't die. I'm saying the fact that Hamas uses civilians just like they were so cruel in the way they attack, they are cruel in the way they defend themselves. And if Hamas uses civilians to defend themselves, the civilians will die, and Hamas de facto murdered them. Now, regarding this, I think I speak for almost all Israelis. There isn't going to be a political resolution between Israel and Hamas. There is only going to be victory, and victory means wiping out Hamas. Is that a big goal? Yes, it is. Are Israelis up for it? Yes, we are. Are we going to achieve this? Yes, we know the journey is long. We know it's going to be tough. But our soldiers are not going to come home, and we will not put down our guns until it will be safe to live in Be'eri and Nachal Oz and Kfar Aza, and it will only be safe to live.
We're going to have to interrupt you because clearly we are running out of time. But there is a separate question that perhaps we'll address in the days to come about what then happens to those civilians in Gaza and the whole humanitarian aspect. But thanks for joining us there in Jerusalem with your assessment as we see, of course, the pictures of Gaza and indeed inside Israel in Ashkelon in the south.
Yes, and thank you to Robert Fox, Defence Editor at the Evening Standard, for your valuable input this afternoon. We do really appreciate it. Thanks for your company as well as we bring you the latest on this unfolding war between Israel and Hamas. Civilians fleeing northern Gaza, they have just hours to do it.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me.